Well, committee, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know some others are on their way up. Committee, I'd like you to note that in your packet, we do have some information from the Department of Revenue on using temporary driver's license and ID cards and the process for getting that. They asked that we distribute that. Also in your packet is a reference to the amendment that was talking about towing and recovery from Mr. Whitaker yesterday. With that, we'll turn our attention to open the hearing on House Bill 2165. Adam, can you give us a briefing?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2165 would allow essentially all vehicles that are more than 35 years of age to qualify as an antique vehicle for registration purposes. Additionally, amendments on the House would remove street rod vehicles as a class of vehicles for registration purposes. Section 1 of the bill modifies the definition of antique for antique vehicles. Current law provides that an antique vehicle means any vehicle, more than 35 years of age, propelled by a motor using petroleum fuel, steam, or electricity, or any combination thereof. The bill would modify that defined term, so that way any vehicle more than 35 years of age, regardless of the age or type of components or equipment installed in the vehicle, would qualify. Secondarily, sections 2 through 4 of the bill removes the classification and reference to street rod vehicles. This class would no longer exist. Currently, street rod means any vehicle that is manufactured in 1949 or before that has been altered or modified would be referred to as a street rod. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee, questions for Adam? Adam, that street rod modification, is that eliminating that street rod license plate?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you. Committee, further questions for Adam? Seeing none, we'll turn our attention to the proponents. First up, we have Representative Delperdang. Welcome, Senate Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good morning, committee. It's good to be here. Before I even start, I wanted to let everybody know this is essentially the same bill as we went through last year. It was 2528. It made it through the House. It was sent over here, but due to the COVID, it never made it through here, so it was never heard on the Senate side. But I want to let you know I'm standing here today as a citizen of Kansas, as a legislator, and a member of the SEMA organization, which is the Automotive Special Equipment Marketing Association. And I'm asking for support of 2165, which would remove any unnecessary restrictions currently required for vehicles registered as an antique. The classic car hobby represents about $45 billion in the automotive industry, including 68 companies that are based right here in Kansas. Those companies manufacture, rebuild, distribute, and retail parts and accessories for the motor vehicles. Currently, the Kansas statute identifies the antique vehicle as being more than 35 years old and as close to original as possible without any significant alterations of the major components. HB 2165 would require that the vehicle only be 35 years or older, regardless of the age of the components installed on the vehicle. And I just wanted to point out, many of the newer parts that are typically installed on these older vehicles are done for safety reasons. Items such as tires, brakes, rotors, axles, glass, etc. Other parts are placed on the vehicles for aesthetic purposes, such as wheels, chrome, lights, or interior modifications. But in many cases, the aftermarket parts that are placed on these older vehicles are just there because the original replacement parts are no longer available. So what I focused on when I was working on this bill too was that since 1954, there's one feature on the antique vehicles that cannot be altered or changed under the federal law. That feature is known as the VIN, or the vehicle identification number. In the case of vehicles equipped with the VIN, that alone needs to be the determining factor of the year the vehicle was built and of the antique status. Now, for vehicles manufactured prior to 1954, we should be using the original manufacturer date to make that determining factor. There's another reason I'm standing here before you today. When I'm vice chairman of transportation on the House side, and when this bill ran through, we had an amendment that was placed onto it. So I'm asking for your committee's help to possibly remove this amendment, but it was heard on February 4th of 2021, and the amendment was brought in good intention. It really was, but it was adversely stripped all the wording referring to pre-1949 vehicles, which you just heard the revisor talk about, and concerning the modified street rods. There are cases where individuals will hand build these aftermarket vehicles, such as the old popular 1932 Fords. These vehicles are customarily registered as a street rod, and they carry a street rod license plate. And our intention of the bill was to keep this option available for those who do build these vehicles and wish to register their vehicle as a street rod. So with that, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Also in the handout, there's a document here that just kind of explains and goes through VIN numbers, what they are and what the different numbers mean on there. But other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Representative Delperdang? Senator Pittman.
One thing, I think on our testimony, I don't think I got the second page of Representative Delperdang's. There it is.
2 pages total.
There it is, now I see it.
My testimony's on the first and the VIN stuff is on the second.
I support taking this, putting the street rod back in, but one thing is, why do we keep it at that one date, was it 1949?
I'm sorry?
Is the street rod only with components from pre-1949? Why do we keep it at 1949 and not advance that per year or something like that?
Hoping maybe, I don't know if the next speaker might be able to get into that a little bit more, but
okay.
I'm not overly familiar with the older vehicles like that. I'm more of the 50s and 60s type.
It seems like in 10 years, 1949 is pretty long ago, and
yeah.
So I didn't know if that needed to have some kind of an update.
I think from current laws, it was mentioned pre-1949. It was actually called out in the statute.
We want to advance that to some other date?
No, I don't think we're trying to do that at all. We're just trying to keep the street rod element in there for the people that do want the street rod tags. It should be their choice.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to have you here.
Thank you, sir.
I'll try not to ask impossible questions, but I did have a constituent send me an email and said that 80 to 90% of these vehicles that we have that are antique vehicles are probably in violation because they've done these safety modifications. So I think us making this legal is a good idea. I just wonder if that is being enforced, and has that caused your members and your SEMA group and others to suffer because of that?
The answer is emphatically yes. We've had, for example, a car show in Wichita area, which is where I'm from, and they had police and troopers kind of in the area as the people were leaving the car show, and they were pulling them over. And if you had a 1950-some vehicle with an antique tag on it, they were looking at the date stamp on your tires, and if it was newer than 1954, you were in violation, and they were writing tickets. And that's the kind of harassment that people are getting from time to time. And let me ask you a question. Would you want to drive around with 1954 tires on your vehicle? The answer is no, for obvious reasons. But
Happy to have any tires. No.
yeah. But there's certain items that obviously you replace them. I want newer brakes on mine. If I want to put a different set of wheels on it, who cares? It doesn't modify the vehicle, so to speak.
Is this going to make this a $50 million fiscal note? We're going to lose money because we're not able to shake down these car shows?
Actually, if you look at the fiscal note on it, it appears as a negative number. I think the number was 68,444 vehicles in Kansas are eligible, but a vast number of that already have them, so it's not as bad as it looks. And I would ask that when the next speaker comes up, he's got some really interesting numbers to kind of crunch on that actually kind of turned my view on it a little bit too.
Good. I had one other follow-up question.
Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned on the VIN number, and you can't alter that, but there's some antique cars that don't have VIN numbers. So how do you get the manufactured date or number if there's not a VIN number on some of those older vehicles?
That does come a little bit more of a gray area, but yeah, VIN numbers officially started in 1954. So you get older than that, and you may have one in 1953 here and there, but not official, and they were not standardized by any means at that point. So in the bill, I pulled out or pointed out that I want it to be, if it's a 1932 automobile that was manufactured in 1932, then it should be registered as a 32. You know, if it's a 1949 or so like that, it should be the date of the manufacture of the vehicle. Even without a VIN, you've got a specific vehicle model there and date.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In committee, I don't know if it's just my packet, but I don't have the physical note in my folder today. There wasn't one available?
I could actually get one for you because I think I've got it. I don't have it with, but
Excellent. If you could email that to Florence, I'm watching the participants online, so I can't just log on instantly to look at it.
I could do that later on here.
Next up, we have Senator Cluse and then Elaine Bowers. Senator Bowers. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just a simple question, just because I don't know. What's the difference between the antique and the street rod tag? What does that entail?
The street rod tag is typically for, and I think in my testimony, I pulled out the 32 Ford. It's always been said there's more 32 Fords in service today than what Henry Ford originally manufactured. So in other words, if I was to get one of these, you can essentially order the parts out of a catalog. I could build one today. Does that make it an antique? No. I'm going to have a highly modified vehicle. That really should be registered as a street rod. So, and there is actually I didn't know it until I got into this, but there is truly a Kansas street rod tag. And it costs just a little bit more than the antique. The prices are pretty darn close. But some people like to have that street rod tag on their vehicle, or in some cases it does belong if I had made a new vehicle right now.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, good morning, by the
Thank you.
way, Representative. You said the amendment was good intention, but what was the carrier of the amendment trying to do? Did he have his wording wrong that affected the bill? Do we need to tweak that sentence to preserve something that person wanted, or is it even important to the bill at all? What was the motive of why?
We wanted to
the committee
keep the
member-
bill clean, but it was a new person to the committee, and I think he had possibly he had some older vehicles he wanted as antiques, but currently they were registered as a hot rod because he had a few aftermarket parts, including tires and wheels and that kind of thing on it. So I think he thought, I'm going to get rid of this, that way I can get my antique tag I've always wanted. But I don't want to speak for that individual, but I really know it was done with good intention. It just kind of backfired when we found out after it was passed through that suddenly the hot rod tag is no longer. It was stripped out of there. And that was we better do something.
Yeah, and that's not what we want. So thank you for telling me that. I didn't want to undo something that someone really wanted or felt a need for, but I think it was not good. And it does not fit here. So thank you, Leo.
Committee, further questions for Representative Delperdang? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reviser probably would know specifically what to do, but I noticed in the bill there are strikeouts on street rod in several different places, like maybe even a half a dozen or so. Are you saying we need to eliminate that strikeout in all those places or just in some specific?
I would have, and I don't have a copy of the amendment with, I would like to modify the bill back to what it originally was. So whatever was changed, which I think those hot rod strikeouts are a result of the amendment, then I would like to change it back to the original bill.
Mr. Chairman, could we ask the representative to get with the reviser and get that amendment? And I'm happy to carry that amendment, or anybody else, if he would work that out with the reviser.
That would work. I think the reviser's online to hear you authorizing him to work on that amendment.
Thank you. Didn't think you'd get that much help here, did you?
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Any further questions? Thank you. I think you'll make it to be able to testify by 9.
Thank you.
Next proponent we have is Joshua Blick. Joshua, in your testimony, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and address the issue of the fiscal note.
Yes, I sure can. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak today. I'm the one who kind of started this thing. A buddy of mine called me. First of all, my name is Joshua Blick. I apologize. I live at 2039 South Everett in Wichita, Kansas. I put on one of the largest car shows in the state of Kansas called Automobilia. We do it in Wichita, Kansas, and take about 2 square miles. But a buddy of mine called me one day, and he's pulled over by the side of the road by a highway patrol officer coming back from Hays, Kansas, seeing his granddaughter at college. And he has aftermarket tires and wheels on his car on a 67 Firebird that he bought originally from high school. This was his high school car. He's paid taxes all these years on this vehicle, and he gets pulled over, and he was like, am I speeding? What's going on? He goes, actually, you can't have those tires and wheels on your vehicle with an antique tag like this. So there's a couple of different tags that we talk about. This is the original 1961 tag that was issued out in 1961. Now, if you you have a 61 Chevy and you want to put this tag on your car, you could do that. You go to the tag office and say, hey, I found a tag. You can have an SG for Sedgwick County, or you can have a Harvey County, whatever county you would decide you want, or a tag, you can put that on there as long as the number matches. So a 61 goes on the 61 car. Now, if you don't want one of these, the state will issue you a tag that says antique on the very top, or if you have a hot rod, it will actually say street rod down at the bottom. Or they also have a museum, it's called a specialty antique tag. So there's actually 3 antique tags that the state can issue out. The difference is price and then also the restrictions. The restrictions of an antique tag is basically older than 35 years of age, and it has to be original. And so when my buddy got pulled over, the highway patrol officer actually printed this off, an 8.5 by 11. And on here, this is straight from the state of Kansas, it says you cannot modify even in tires and wheels in bold. So if he had a 1967 Firebird, he would have to have bias ply tires on there. Bias ply tires pretty much were the wayside back in the 70s. Everything went radial. Everybody in this room probably has a newer car. It has radials. They're way safer because bias ply are a straight tire that actually catches the grooves on the road and would throw people off the highway. And so that's why they went to radials where they're curved. So in that groove, whenever you hit it, then you could come right back over. So a lot of this that we're talking about is safety. When it comes down to people that, I have 6 classic cars. And whenever I want to build it, I want to make sure that not only are other people safe, but my family first and foremost. And so whenever I build a car, I do have cars, I have 2 cars with bias ply tires, and they are 3 times as much than a regular radial tire because I end up having to spend some extra money because I want to make sure it's like 100% original. So whenever classic car guys are looking at these cars and building them back, their old high school cars and everything, they look at trying to find parts like State Representative said, and it's very hard to find parts. So you go to O'Reilly's, AutoZone and everything. Well, if you think about this, like they said earlier, 70 to 80% of every car that comes to my car show is illegal because they have different tires and wheels, they could have a different paint job. If you think about this industry, it's huge because not only that, you have the builder that builds the car, you have a tire and wheel guy that are in violation. So if I go and I put a set of tires and wheels on a guy's car and I'm a tire shop and it's a classic car, I basically just made that vehicle illegal. And so that's why it's so important, not only just because of that and safety, is being able to have this for future generations and legacies and so forth. It was kind of funny after I started this whole process and got with some state representatives, Nicole Heisel and Leo, that I started talking around. I started touring the state and going around to different car shows, and I started hearing stories. I have a gentleman that has a 1937 Model T, and now it's registered as a 2018 Model T. He has to pay taxes. He paid $36,000 from this car, had it purchased in Dayton, Ohio, went to title it, went up to the Highway Patrol office to get it, to have them inspect it. They kicked him out and says, I'm sorry, that's not the original motor that's in it. And so he now has a vehicle that is not worth anything. And so he's like, what do I do? He had to sue the state of Kansas. A judge actually had to pay $2,800. The judge says, okay, now the Highway Patrol can actually inspect his vehicle. He paid $2,800 just to have him inspect it. And then after they inspected it, they retitled it as a 2018, and then they took a new VIN plate that's red and drilled it into his firewall that in this classic car. So there's some stories that I've heard the story, same thing with Wichita, Paola, Kansas, Highway Patrol officers lined up. As soon as they pulled out of the car show, bam, pull over. You got 30 days to fix this, get your tag off. And so that 68,000, that has actually been growing because of Highway Patrol officers. I worry about their safety because I know some classic car guys that are buddies of mine, they love their cars more than their wives and kids, some of them. And I will tell you, they've invested so much, or they're retired and they sit in their garage all day and they look over this baby and they think it's heaven sent to them. But that's their passion. That's what they love to do, is they build cars and then they drive them around and everything. So, but basically, when I started doing some research, I started looking at the physical note because that was what came up in the House, and it was 68,444. That number is 68,444 was the number last year. Now, it's kind of interesting because that is also the same number this year. So in the last year, no one has bought or sold a classic car. It's kind of, or titled it. That's kind of interesting right there. But when I looked into it, they said that there was a $1.9 million loss. Well, if all of those 68,000 people would go and retitle them as an antique tag, they would actually generate $2.7 million to the state because it's a $40 filing fee. And then on top of that, if they had to do additional title work, it's $59. And if they wanted to do a personalized tag, so there's actually a fourth tag I didn't tell you about. It says antique, but then you can personalize it. So you can personalize it to whatever you want. You can say Hot Rod 29, whatever that's state, and that is $85. And if we just said 10,000 people decided to do personalized tags, and there's a lot of these guys because they want to say Mopar or whatever, and they'll say the vehicle. That would actually generate, if 10,000 people would do it, and another $1 million. So it's kind of interesting altogether when you take that 68,444 with the existing 114,059 that already have tag owners. Altogether, you would see 182,503. That would be completely all antique tags. So if all of them all of a sudden over at night, just all of a sudden went over and retitled their vehicles as antique, it would generate almost $2.7 million. Instead of being a loss of 1.9, it would actually generate $2.7 million. We've looked at a number of different items and stuff, you know, I know with COVID and everything, I spoke to a lot of classic car guys, and right now the state fee is $17. So every year when you go and file your antique tag, you pay $17. If you think about this all over history, that car has paid taxes for all of its time. If while it was on the road, somebody was driving it, someone was paying taxes on it, all the way back to 1961, if you want to say 1961. Then, now there's continued driving on the state roads, so they're going to be paying a fee. So that $17, $12 of it goes to the state, and $7 goes to the county. So even if we looked at it and said, hey, what if we increased $3 and made it a flat $20 fee to help the state out? It would actually generate $3.6 million with that 182,000 vehicles instantly. Now, I'm not saying just to start jacking the price up and stuff, but it's interesting to see that there were some notes, physical notes that they were throwing out there, some numbers, and everybody got scared. And after I went back through and I spoke to every state representative, they were like, wow, we didn't know these numbers. All we seen was the $1.9 million, and we're under the gun right now. And then when I started showing these numbers, and if those people moved over, they would actually generate. So this bill is actually going to generate revenue. Usually it's just the opposite, but this will actually generate revenue if all 68,000 people that it affects move over and actually get registered. So I'm open to any questions. I really appreciate your time and just in your support on this.
Josh, do you know what the vote was coming out of the House?
Yes, out of the House was a,
I can ask for advisor if you don't have it.
no, I don't. It was like 100, I know it was 9. It was 114, I think, 114 to 9, yes. And before, there was only one person last year. So that physical note thing kind of scared a lot of people. And after I spoke to every single person, except for that one person, I didn't get a phone call back. Everybody was like, oh, I get it now. And I showed them the numbers, and they definitely understand now. So.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you so much for being here today. I just had a quick question, and you might have said this and I missed it. Do you have, or do you know where there's a registry of antique cars that are currently, excuse me, licensed by county?
No, I do not, because it was very hard to get that 100. It took them 3 months just to give me that 118, or, yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, because I've gotten a few emails as well, about how difficult it is.
Yes.
Because they've had some replacement parts, primarily tires.
Yes.
Cars, they get to drive them in parades, which brings me to another self-serving.
Definitely.
If I had that registry, I could get an antique car in my next parade.
There you go.
Just thinking ahead, just thinking ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This would allow like the Model Ts to replace their cable brakes with hydraulic brakes. That would be allowable, or people that put on tubular shocks instead of the old spring shocks.
Definitely. Yes, yeah.
They want to drive them and use their vehicles.
And it's funny too, even glass, because I talked to a guy in the glass industry and he's like, well, he goes, I'm putting this aftermarket glass in because there's no glass that's out there. Most of them got broke over time or something like that in warehouses. And he goes, it's hard to find glass for these antique vehicles. You can go out to salvage yards and stuff, but they're always got bullet holes in them or whatever. But he goes, we actually hand cut plate glass that's kind of got a laminate film. And he goes, we hand cut this, it's a craft, and then they put them inside these vehicles. Well, it's an aftermarket glass, basically. It's not the original glass, and it's killing their industry because they're making it would basically make a vehicle illegal because they're putting that part on there.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I had no idea that you could get a tag, but it has to be an antique vehicle to get the 61 tag, and you can pick any county you want.
Yes, yeah.
I assume it has to be a Kansas county.
Yes, it sure does. And it's kind of interesting because you guys actually voted on this. I think it was about 8 years ago. I brought it to a state representative also because in 1977, I have a 77 Mini Cooper, and I couldn't get a 1977 because 35 years from then. Because in 1976, they stopped making press tags and started going to a sticker. So in 1977, they went to a sticker, and then every year from then, it's been a sticker. So if you find a 1976 tag and it has a sticker of 1977, you could actually put that on my 1977 Mini Cooper. And it's kind of confusing, but what happened was is people would go up and say, hey, I want to put this tag, and they were like, no, we only do press. The latest year you could go is 1976. And then they were like, well, it's got a sticker of 77 on it. Can we tag it? So you guys actually did the bill, it passed. And so now you can have a 1977 or any tag that has a sticker of that year on there. So basically 77 on to present day, that's older than 35 years of age, you can put that tag on that vehicle. And if you don't have the sticker, the county will actually provide that sticker for you now. So if you find a tag that's a 1976, they'll put 1984 on there because that's the latest year right now. If you have an 84 Dodge Ram pickup, you can get an 84 with an antique tag, original, whatever you like. So it's great that this business is still out there where you can find these old classic tags, because then that's actually saving the state money also, because they're using old tags, and then they register it with the number in the county.
But they have to be an old pressed tag.
Yes, they have to be an old press.
Use our new digital tags.
You can use the digital one if you want, but a lot of these guys like having the ones where they're old pressed. Like this one was $25, and there's the whole business out there that people search and go through barns trying to find when they're hanging up on the walls and stuff, and find these tags because it's a lucrative business. Yeah.
Is there any problem for law enforcement if you have a tag? Like I live in Riley County, but I would do a Thomas County tag.
No, actually, surprisingly not, because say like this is Sedgwick County, and you're up here, and you want this 239, say if your motor was a 239 or whatever, then you can have this tag if you wanted to. So regardless of whatever county, as long as it's an antique press tag, you can register it, or you can get the state-issued one. It's up to you.
Interesting. Thanks
Yeah.
for that information. Thank you, Mr.
Committee, further questions?
Don't want to beat a dead tag.
Seeing none, thank you, Josh. Appreciate you coming. Are
Thank
there
you.
any other proponents? Any neutrals? Any opponents? We'll close the hearing. We'll now, committee, we'll turn our attention on House Bill 2165. We'll now turn our attention to Senate Bill 158. Adam, you want to give us a quick briefing on that?
Sure, thank you,
We just
Mr.
heard it
Chairman.
yesterday.
Senate Bill 158 would prohibit the towing of vehicles outside the state of Kansas without prior consent. The bill requires an interstate search of registered owners and lien holders prior to the sale of a non-repairable vehicle. Any vehicle less than 10 years of age. And the bill would also require that publication in the newspaper 7 days prior to the sale of the vehicle at auction. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Adam? Committee, I know there was an amendment that was discussed, that worked with the stakeholders groups from Mr. Whitaker. Do we have that, Florence? Pass that out. Adam, while we're distributing this, you want to explain this amendment?
Sure.
If not, I guess we have Mr. Whitaker in the room. We could ask him if he would like to explain the amendment. You can stay seated down if you'd like. Just be sure to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Whitaker, Kansas Motor Carriers Association. The balloon before you does two things. One, as far as who can ask for a vehicle to be towed out of state, includes an insurance company or an agent of an insurance company. And the Second Amendment makes sure that the requirement to check the internet for registered owner and lien holders in other states is limited to the towing and recovery lien law. And that's all the two amendments do.
Committee, I'll offer this amendment. Do we have a second? Or do we have any questions on the amendment? Seconded by Senator Pittman. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, the amendment is adopted. Committee, what's your, Senator Pittman?
Mr. Chair, I had another amendment drawn up, and I think Adam was going to get it out. Lawrence, do you have that by chance? While she's passing that out, it's just, we talked yesterday in committee that right now the law says we're going to search for lien holders when it's 10 years or less in terms of age of a car. When we discussed it yesterday, I thought it might be, you know, I have an older car and it's still worth something, I guess, but 15 years seems like it's a little bit broader in terms of just making sure our stakeholders out there who have valuable cars aren't getting their cars towed away and sold. So we've, I've asked that we make that 15 years versus just the 10 years. And so that's the amendment.
Take that as a motion.
Yes, sir. I'd like to. That's
We have a second. Seconded by Senator Bowers. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Amendment is adopted. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. I'm just curious as to the confirmation of allowing it to be towed out of state. Does that have to be written, or is that verbal? Is it acceptable? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill just states consent of the driver, so it really doesn't explicitly state either way.
It has to be with the consent of the driver or owner. Is that correct, Adam?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, without one of the three groups, it really just uses the word consent. So that's how it's phrased.
So if they're picking it up out of an apartment complex or whatever, they wouldn't have the driver, you know, an abandoned vehicle, they would not have a driver or owner at that point in time? Did that answer your question, Senator Tyson? Any further questions? Seeing none, committee, what's your pleasure on the bill? Senator Hawk.
I move we pass Senate Bill 158 as amended out favorably for passage.
We have a second. Seconded by Senator Dietrich. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Committee, now turn our attention to the other bill we heard yesterday. I believe it was 146 from Revenue, moving the interlocks to the Highway Patrol. Adam, you want to give us a description?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 146, essentially all it does is it changes the oversight of the state certification ignition interlock manufacturers. It changes that from the Department of Revenue to the Highway Patrol. That includes the use of monies credited to the DUI/IID fund, also just the general approval and rules and regulations. It switches the names in statute from Division of Vehicles to Highway Patrol. And with that, I'd be happy to stay for any questions.
Committee, questions for Adam? Seeing none, committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we recommend Senate Bill 146 favorably for passage.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Pittman.
one question.
One question by Senator Pittman, sorry. Do we have a second by Senator Dietrich? Okay.
I was just going to ask if the maker of the motion might make this onto the consent calendar. I think this is pretty non-controversial. I think there was wide agreement that this was a good thing. So I was just wondering if the maker might amend this motion to make it onto the consent calendar.
It's a Senate bill, so it wouldn't matter.
Okay. We'll put that on this consent calendar.
Is that agreeable with the second? Motion's made to pass it out favorable, and because it's of a non-controversial nature, to place it on the consent calendar. Further discussion. Senator Hawk.
Thank you, and I was online yesterday, but I didn't think to ask this question. Will the Highway Patrol get the money that they've been getting from Department of Revenue? Did we discuss that?
I believe they stated they're in control of the funds. That's what they're basically doing, is transferring that over.
So they'll transfer that to the Highway Patrol, you think?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
The Highway Patrol is currently doing this right now. It's kind of codifying current practice. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carried. Committee, due to my scheduling issues, we do have a meeting tomorrow where we'll be hearing 3 bills. I don't intend to work any bills tomorrow since we got our work done today. Monday, we will have a presentation. There'll be no bills worked Monday, but we will be hearing and working bills Tuesday and Wednesday next week for sure. With that, we are adjourned.